The fluorescent lights of the Havenwood Police Department felt abrasive against the late hour, casting a sickly yellow glow over the worn linoleum floor. Detective Marcus Thorne, a man whose face carried the permanent shadows of 1,000 sleepless nights, was sipping the 24th cup of coffee this week, a vile, lukewarm sludge that tasted vaguely of burnt plastic. He wasn't expecting anything. Havenwood was a town where the most exciting crime was usually a stolen garden gnome. But tonight, a thick, unnatural silence had settled over the precinct, heavier than the usual graveyard shift quiet. Even the dispatcher, usually a whirlwind of background chatter, was eerily still. "Anything, Sarah?" Thorne asked, walking over to the dispatch desk, his boots squeaking on the polished floor. Sarah Chen, a young officer with an unnervingly calm demeanor, looked up from her screen. Her eyes, usually bright with nervous energy, were dull. "Just one call, detective. Came in about an hour ago. And, it's strange." Thorne leaned closer. The details on the screen were sparse. 911 hang-up. Address, 1478, Blackwood Lane. Caller, unidentified. Time, 3 o'clock. A hang-up? That's what's got you looking like you just saw a ghost. Thorne scoffed, taking another sip of his coffee. "Not the hang-up, detective. The audio." Sarah pressed a key. The small speaker on the desk crackled to life. Static, then a faint, distorted breath, like someone struggling underwater. Then, a voice. It wasn't human. It was deep, resonating, and sounded like it was speaking from inside a massive, hollow space. It wasn't screaming, but the tone was one of absolute, cold terror. 0-3-0-0, the time of the turning. The eyes, they don't have lids. The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a wet, shuddering sound, followed by the distant, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. Thorne felt a prickle of ice run down his spine. That wasn't a prank. That sound, that rhythmic thump, was profoundly disturbing. "I ran a trace on the voice," Sarah whispered, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "It's a digital manipulation, but the underlying source. The voice is recorded, likely synthesized, but the background noise, the thump, is live. And the location, 1478, Blackwood Lane, is an abandoned house, sealed up since the 70s after the whole Blackwood murders thing." Thorne remembered the case. A family of 4, found dead in their beds, no forced entry, no discernible cause of death, just eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The case had become local folklore, the house a macabre landmark. "No one's been in that house for 50 years, Thorne stated, his skepticism wrestling with a growing knot of dread. "That's the thing, detective. I ran the address through the city's power grid monitor. And a single, specific circuit in the house, one that has been disconnected for decades, is drawing power right now. Not much. Just a trickle. Enough to power a single, low-wattage device." Thorne looked at the clock. 3:45 a.m. The time of the call, 3 a.m., was always referred to by old-timers as the Devil's Hour. "Get me Patrolman Miller and Davies. Tell them to meet me at Blackwood Lane." And Sarah, Thorne grabbed his coat and flashlight, his adrenaline finally kicking in, pulled a file on the Blackwood murders. Every piece of paper, every photograph. And keep listening to that line. If it calls again, patch it directly to my radio. He was walking toward the door when Sarah spoke, her voice barely audible. "Detective, the initial call was placed from a landline inside the house. The phone line was cut in 1978. It shouldn't exist." Thorne stopped, the cold silence of the precinct pressing in on him. He didn't turn around. He just stared at the chipped paint on the double doors. Just pull the file, Sarah, he said, pushing the doors open into the cold, silent, pre-dawn air. The unmarked patrol car, followed by the heavier unit carrying Patrolman Miller and Davies, crunched to a halt on the overgrown gravel drive of 1478, Blackwood Lane. The house was exactly as Thorne remembered it from the case files, a desolate, two-story colonial, bleached gray by decades of neglect, its windows boarded up and draped with thick, suffocating vines. It looked less like an abandoned house and more like a tomb. "Place gives me the creeps, Detective," Miller muttered, adjusting the fit of his vest. He was the younger of the two patrolmen, his nervousness manifesting as excessive professionalism. "It should," Thorne replied, pulling his service pistol. "Keep your eyes open, Miller. Davies, cover the back. We're looking for signs of forced entry, squatters, maybe some idiot with a death wish." But as they approached the front porch, the expected signs of decay gave way to the unsettling anomaly Sarah had hinted at. The original wooden front door was gone. In its place was a heavy, industrial-grade steel door, secured with three massive, newly polished bolts. Stenciled crudely onto the door was an emblem Thorne hadn't seen in decades, the original, hand-drawn logo of the Havenwood PD, circa 1975. "No forced entry here," Davies whispered, running a gloved hand over the cold metal. "This door must weigh a ton. And why the old logo?" Thorne ignored the question, his gaze fixed on the lock. It wasn't the original deadbolt. It was a modern, electronic keypad lock. He pressed his ear close to the cold steel. There was a faint, almost imperceptible hum coming from inside. The trickle of power Sarah had detected. "Sarah," Thorne spoke into his radio, his voice low. "I need you to run a cross-reference on PD logs. Specifically, equipment purchases or inventory from 1975 to 1980. We need to know who ordered a steel door for Blackwood Lane." He then ran a UV light along the keypad. "No recent prints. Back up, guys." Thorne drew his pistol fully and kicked the door near the hinges. It didn't budge. He stepped back and aimed for the keypad, but hesitated. He didn't want to alert anyone inside until they knew what they were dealing with. Suddenly, Miller pointed to the bottom of the steel door. "Detective. Look." Wedged beneath the heavy threshold was a small, folded piece of paper. It looked fresh. Thorne picked it up with the tip of his knife and unfolded it. It was a Polaroid photograph. It showed the house's living room. The room was identical to the one in the 1978 crime scene photos, furniture covered in dust sheets, cobwebs thick as gauze. But in the center of the frame, seated in a high-backed armchair, was a man. He was wearing an old Havenwood PD uniform. And his face was utterly obscured by a heavy, black hood. In white chalk, scrawled beneath the figure, was a single sentence, "We're waiting." Thorne felt a chilling certainty that the image was taken recently. "Okay, forget the logs," Thorne ordered, his voice tight. "Miller, grab the breaching tool. We're going in." The heavy crack of the hydraulic ram echoed through the desolate woods. On the third blow, the steel door groaned, then buckled inward with a deafening clang. A blast of cold, stale air rushed out, carrying the smell of mold, old wood, and something metallic, like stale blood and ozone. They moved into the living room, their flashlights cutting through the absolute darkness. Thorne was right, the entire room was preserved in a layer of fine, undisturbed gray dust, a sedimentary layer of time, 50 years thick. Every piece of furniture, every forgotten trinket, was draped in the powdery evidence of decades of silence. But in the center of the room, exactly where the figure in the Polaroid had been seated, was a perfect circle, about 6 feet in diameter. It was completely clean. The floorboards were visible, polished smooth, as if someone had scrubbed the area down just hours ago. And there, in the very middle of the clean circle, sitting atop a dust-free end table, was a cheap, red plastic child's toy tape recorder. It was running. The small red light blinked steadily. Thorne knelt, his flashlight beam fixed on the device. He could hear the faint, low whirring of the tape spooling. He reached out a trembling hand and pressed the stop button. Silence. A profound, absolute silence that was worse than the unsettling sounds. He pressed rewind, then play. The tape began with the same synthesized, terrifying voice from the 911 call, 0-3-0-0. The time of the turning. But this time, the message didn't stop. After a pause, the deep, hollow voice continued, a new layer of menace in its tone. The key is not in the lock. The key is in the memory. Now, listen to the thump, listen to the time. Then, the tape played the rhythmic, sickening thump, 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 from the 911 call. But this time, it was louder, clearer, and it was followed by a chilling, wet scream, a sound that was unmistakably a man choking on his own blood. Thorne stared at the recorder, his blood turning to ice. The police radio on his shoulder crackled to life. It was Sarah, her voice strained. "Detective. The trace worked. I found the source of the magnetic anomaly that was powering the line. It's not the city grid. It's a localized, self-contained power source, built into the foundation of the house. And I found the log for the steel door. It was ordered in 1977 by the lead detective on the Blackwood murders case. Detective James Thorne. Your father." The name hung in the air, a physical weight pressing down on Thorne's chest, Detective James Thorne. His father. The man who had trained him, who had taught him the rules of the force, and who had committed suicide in his patrol car 10 years later, a mystery never solved. Why did he seal this house? Thorne pocketed the tape recorder, the cheap plastic suddenly feeling like a heavy stone. "Sarah, you're sure about the log?" "Positive, Detective," Sarah's voice wavered over the radio. "The manifest shows the order for custom steel door, Blackwood project signed by James Thorne. And the note on the file says, for containment. Protocol 7A approved. I can't find anything on Protocol 7A. Forget the protocol. Focus on the anomaly," Thorne commanded, his mind racing. "The power source, where is it?" "The sensor is localized, Detective. It's radiating from the substructure. The basement or crawlspace." Thorne looked at Miller and Davies. They were frozen, their flashlights illuminating the pristine circle of floorboards, clearly having overheard the radio transmission. "We follow the power," Thorne declared, holstering his weapon. "Davies, cover the door. Miller, help me search for the basement access." It took only a minute. Behind a heavy, dust-covered bookshelf in the dining room, they found a small, almost invisible hatch set into the floor. The hatch wasn't secured with a lock, but by a simple, old-fashioned bolt. Thorne slid the bolt back. The air that wafted up was intensely cold and carried a distinct mineral odor, wet concrete and iron. Thorne descended first, his flashlight beam cutting a path through the pitch black. The basement was small, dry, and oddly modern. Instead of the dusty, cobwebbed cellar he expected, the floor was poured concrete, and the walls were strangely clean. "This doesn't look like a 1920s basement," Miller noted, following him down. "It looks modified," Thorne agreed, surveying the space. He walked to the center of the room, shining his light toward the back wall. And there it was. Not a dusty foundation wall, but a massive, freshly poured concrete barrier, running the entire width of the basement. It was at least 2 feet thick, reinforced with rebar that protruded slightly at the top seam. This wall wasn't built 50 years ago. It was built recently. And it sealed something off completely. It's new, Thorne breathed, running his hand over the rough surface. The concrete is fully cured, but this was added long after the house was condemned. He pressed his ear to the cold surface, urging Miller to turn off his flashlight and be silent. And then they heard it. Clearer now, amplified by the confined space. Thump. 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 It was heavy, dull, and perfectly rhythmic. Like a colossal, slow heartbeat emanating from behind the wall. It wasn't the sound of an engine or machinery. It was organic. Suddenly, the cheap plastic tape recorder in Thorne's pocket began to play automatically, the sound tinny but piercing in the absolute silence. The key is in the memory. Thorne pulled it out, trying to silence it, but the recorder was stuck. The strange voice continued, this time speaking a new sequence, layered over the rhythmic thumping. 87. 3-2. Acknowledge the source. Thorne immediately recognized the cadence. It was a police cipher, a standard numerical code used for communication in the 70s. 87 is location, Thorne whispered, translating automatically. 3-2 is containment failure. The thumping behind the wall momentarily paused. Then, there was a loud, wet scrape, like something massive dragging itself across stone. The voice on the recorder changed, its tone sounding strangely relieved. Acknowledge the source. Now, look down. Thorne and Miller simultaneously aimed their flashlights at the concrete floor beneath their feet. Etched into the surface of the floor, right at the base of the massive concrete wall, was a single, deep, clean carving, barely covered by a scattering of concrete dust. It wasn't a word or a symbol. It was a perfectly rendered map of the Havenwood police precinct, the one they had just left. A tiny X marked the location of Thorne's own desk. Thorne felt a sick wave of realization wash over him. This isn't about the Blackwood murders, he whispered, stepping back from the wall. This entire house, the door, the power, the timing, it's a message. It's a lure. The rhythmic thumping resumed behind the wall, but it now sounded closer, heavier, and slower. Thump. 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 Suddenly, Davies's frantic voice burst over the radio from upstairs. Detective Thorne. We have a problem. The steel door, it just slammed shut. And I can't get it open. I hear that thumping sound, it's moving outside the house now. And the cruiser, the lights just went out. The basement plunged into chaos. The lights flickered and died, and Davies's panicked shouts echoed from the main floor before being cut short by a sound like something colossal dragging steel across pavement. Davies. Report. Thorne yelled into his radio, but he was met only with static and the relentless, pounding thump. Thump. Thump, now vibrating through the very foundation beneath their boots. We're locked in, detective. Miller's voice was strained, his flashlight beam shaking wildly as he aimed it toward the sealed hatch above them. Forget the hatch for now. Whatever's out there is trying to keep us in here, Thorne said, grabbing a road flare from the emergency kit on Miller's belt. We need to know what's behind this wall, and we need to move fast. He cracked the flare. The intense, sputtering crimson light filled the basement, casting long, dancing shadows that made the concrete wall look like something alive. The heat was welcome, but the light revealed something far more disturbing than the shadows had concealed. Look, Miller, Thorne pointed. In the stark red light, the newly poured concrete wall wasn't smooth. Embedded deep within the surface, at irregular intervals, was a repeating, concentric pattern of small, perfect circles. They were roughly the size of a human iris, slightly convex, and spaced out like a terrifying, abstract mosaic that spanned the entire structure. What are those? Air bubbles. Miller whispered, running a trembling finger over one of the indentations. No, Thorne shook his head, his voice grim. They're too precise. They're pressed in. Like something with a circular edge was pushed in before the concrete cured. He crouched down, examining the base of the wall again. The etched map of the Havenwood precinct on the floor seemed to shimmer faintly in the flare light. As the thump outside grew momentarily louder, the etched lines of the map deepened, almost glowing with a faint, greenish hue. The map is reacting to the thumping, Thorne realized aloud. It's a proximity alarm. And this wall, it's not just a barrier. It's a message, or maybe even a containment vessel. Thorne remembered the chilling words from the tape, the eyes, they don't have lids. He looked up at the circular impressions in the concrete. The light hit them just right, and for a terrifying second, Thorne swore he saw a dark, reflective sheen from within the indentation, like a deep, colorless void staring back. Detective, Miller pointed towards a corner near the back of the basement, away from the wall. The power source. It's coming from over there. In the corner, partially concealed by the wall's rebar runoff, was a thick, insulated cable. It led into a small, sealed utility box secured to the main foundation. The box was old, marked with the same obsolete Havenwood PD seal, and a faint, rhythmic tick-tick-tick was emanating from inside. As Thorne approached, the thumping outside intensified, slowing slightly, as if whatever was making the sound was now standing directly above them, listening. Thump, thump, thump. Thorne tried the utility box. It was locked. He slammed his flashlight against the weak-looking padlock. It broke immediately. Inside, the box was simple, a series of dry-cell batteries wired to a small, constantly running generator, which fed into a single, specialized electromagnetic coil. The entire contraption was buzzing with energy, the source of the subtle power draw Sarah had detected. But beneath the batteries, tucked into the casing, was another note. It was fragile, yellowed, and written in a familiar, shaky hand. It was his father's. The note read. Asterisk Marcus, if you're reading this, the time is 3 o'clock. The containment is failing. The source must not be let out. It follows the line. Do not try to fight the thumping, it is only the time signature. The truth is in the eyes. You must find the third sign before it finds the asterisk second. I'm sorry, son. I should have told you. The precinct is built on the wrong ground. J.T. Thorne stared at the note, his gut twisting with cold dread. The precinct is built on the wrong ground. A sudden, deafening smash came from directly above them. The ceiling concrete cracked, and fine dust rained down. The thumping was now immediately overhead, heavy and demanding. And then, the voice from the tape recorder, no, not the tape recorder, but the speaker on the utility box, came to life, loud and clear, cutting through the silence. The second is here. He lies in the light. Now, maroon the witness. As the speaker finished, the reinforced concrete wall began to vibrate violently. A hairline fracture appeared near the center, and from it, a thick, viscous, black fluid began to weep, smelling intensely of iron. We have to get out. Thorne shouted. Miller. We're going back up. Call Sarah. Tell her to get out of the precinct, now. But as they scrambled for the hatch, the rhythmic thumping stopped. Absolute, agonizing silence returned. Then, a low, wet sizzle came from the utility box. The cable connecting the generator to the electromagnetic coil went taut and snapped. The etched map on the floor flashed a brilliant green, burning itself permanently onto the concrete. And the hatch above their heads, the old, simple bolt they had slid open, suddenly slammed shut with a deafening, metallic clack. They were sealed in. The slamming of the hatch was final. Thorne and Miller looked up at the bolted ceiling, the silence now broken only by their heavy breathing and the steady drip of the black, viscous fluid from the fracture in the wall. "We're trapped," Miller stated, his voice hollow. "Davies is gone. Whatever that thumping thing is, it just sealed us in." Thorne gripped the flare, its dying red light casting a desperate, urgent glow. "No. My father didn't lure me here just to seal me in a coffin. He left me the key, the third sign." He pulled out the utility box note, the handwritten words seeming to burn into the paper. "The Blackwood murders file. The key is in the memory. The family was found upstairs. We need to go back up. The hatch is bolted from the outside, Detective." Miller protested, pointing his flashlight at the ceiling. "We're in the basement." Thorne looked around the tight, concrete space, his gaze finally settling on the corner where the utility box had been. "Wait. My father wrote that this wall was for containment. He must have built a way out, or a way through." He shone the beam along the ceiling joists of the basement. The construction was new and solid, until his flashlight beam hit a seam near the rear corner. Instead of joining a foundation beam, the seam met a small, removable wooden panel, stained to match the surrounding wood. "Give me a boost," Thorne commanded. Miller braced himself, and Thorne clambered up, pushing against the panel. It gave way with a soft click. He pulled himself through the small opening and into a cramped, low-ceilinged space, the crawlspace beneath the house's ground floor, which connected directly to an unsearched attic space via a rickety, internal staircase. "This is the third sign," Thorne muttered, pulling Miller up after him. The space they never searched. They climbed the narrow, dust-choked staircase. The attic was oppressively hot and smelled of cedar and forgotten things. Boxes labeled "seasonal decorations" and "family photos" lined the walls. But one item sat in the center of the floor, under a single, bare, low-wattage bulb powered by a dusty wire trailing down the stairs, the same single-circuit Sarah had detected. It was a small, child's wooden writing desk. Thorne approached it slowly. On the desk lay a thick, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and brittle. The name scrawled on the front cover was Eliza Blackwood, the youngest daughter. She had been 8 years old when she died in 1978. Thorne opened the diary to the final entry, dated the night of the murders. The handwriting was neat, childlike, but the ink was smeared in several places as if written in tears. July 14, 1978. 3 a.m. Daddy is downstairs with the big, scratchy machine. He calls it the voice box. He says if the voice box stops, we have to look up. Mama is crying. I don't want to look up. He said the man on the radio is always waiting for the broadcast time. The man on the radio has no face, just the sound of a drum. Daddy says the voice box has to make the thumping noise or the man will take the lids. He made me draw a picture of the time. He drew the circle with the lines. A crude drawing of a circular symbol followed, identical to the indentations in the basement wall. He just came up and told me the policeman is coming. The one with the quiet eyes. He said the man is bringing the second with him, and the second needs the quietest place. He said we have to be the memory for the broadcast to work. I hear the drumming again. It's getting louder. It wants the voice box to stop. Daddy says, don't stop the broadcast. Don't stop the broadcast. Thorne's blood ran cold. The voice box and the thumping were the old PD radio. The Blackwood family wasn't murdered by the monster, they were performing a ritual to contain it. The father was broadcasting a rhythm, the time signature, to keep the entity dormant. And the quiet policeman bringing the second was almost certainly his own father, Detective James Thorne. "The thump is a broadcast, Miller," Thorne breathed. "It's a frequency, not a heartbeat. And my father came here to check on the containment, and somehow, he brought something with him, the second." Miller pointed a shaking finger deeper into the attic. "Detective, if that's the voice box." Hidden beneath a dusty tarp was a large, outdated, military-grade radio transmitter, the kind used by the police department in the 70s. It was old, but the wires connecting it to the attic power source were brand new. And sitting on top of the radio, humming softly, was a replica of the child's red plastic tape recorder. It wasn't the one from downstairs. This one was playing. The synthesized voice repeated a short loop, "The key is in the memory. Do not stop the broadcast." But as the loop finished, the transmitter flashed bright red. A new message, sharper, more urgent, cut through the humming. "Broadcast interrupted. Location 47. Code 32. Second awakened. The time is now." Location 47, Thorne knew that code. It was the old PD designation for the main evidence locker at the Havenwood precinct. "The map, Miller." "The map on the basement floor," Thorne said, rushing back to the hatch. "It marked my desk, but the key is the evidence locker." He slid down into the crawlspace, heading back toward the sealed basement hatch. As he landed, the rhythmic thumping resumed, but it wasn't coming from outside the house anymore. It was coming from inside the walls of the crawlspace, moving toward him with sickening speed. Thump thump. Thump thump. And now, there was a new sound layered over the broadcast rhythm, the faint, sickening squeak 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 of wet leather dragging across rough wood. The sound of a man-sized thing moving on all fours in the dark, restricted space. Thorne turned and brought up his pistol, aiming down the narrow, pitch-black crawlspace tunnel. A low, guttural gasp echoed back at him from the darkness, and then the final words from the attic tape played one last time, high-pitched and distorted, "Now, look up. The man has no face." The low, sickening squeak 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 of wet leather was closing fast. Thorne flattened himself against the cold dirt of the crawlspace, the small flare in his hand the only defense against the absolute darkness and the creature that moved within it. He could smell the iron and ozone now, overwhelming the musty odor of old wood. "Miller! Get down here, now!" Thorne shouted, knowing the creature was trapped in the same narrow tunnel as they were. Miller slid down from the attic, landing with a grunt. "What is that sound?" "The second," Thorne hissed, pulling the pin on the flare. "And I think it's wearing my father's memory. When I say go, you run back to the staircase. Don't look back." Thorne hurled the sputtering red flare down the tunnel. It landed 50 feet away, illuminating the tight space. In the brief, blinding light, they saw it, a tall, gaunt figure, moving on all fours, clad in a shredded, darkened Havenwood PD uniform from the 1970s. The leather holster and belt were the source of the terrible squeaking. The figure's head was tilted back, and where a face should have been, there was only the smooth, reflecting darkness, a massive, lidless, polished void. It didn't scream or roar. It simply lunged toward the light. "Go!" Thorne yelled, firing 3 rounds toward the advancing shape. The bullets hit with a wet thud, but the creature didn't slow. Thorne and Miller scrambled back up the crawlspace access point into the attic. Thorne slammed the small panel shut, jamming a loose floorboard against it. The sound of something heavy slamming into the wood beneath them was followed by a sharp, splintering crack. The radio. Thorne pointed to the old transmitter. "The key must be here." They frantically ripped the wires connecting the transmitter to the power source. Beneath the heavy radio, they found a small, rusted metal canister, the size of a cigar tube. Thorne tore it open. Inside were two objects, a tarnished brass key with a circular head, and a tightly folded, crisp police report, marked classified, JT 77. Thorne immediately recognized the key. It was the master key for the Havenwood PD evidence locker, location 47. He unfolded the report, reading the typewritten summary in the faint light filtering from the attic window. Project, SUB Precinct, Containment Protocol 7A. Date, December 3, 1977. Prepared by Detective James Thorne, Lead Investigator, Blackwood Murders. Summary: the Blackwood containment procedure is inadequate. The phenomenon is a broadcast anomaly, the thump, tethered to an artifact, the eye. The artifact was transferred from Blackwood Lane, a dedicated, reinforced, subterranean facility, that a sub-precinct, has been constructed directly beneath the new Havenwood PD station. The goal is to establish a secure, shielded location for permanent containment of the eye, using the building's foundation and power grid as a stabilizing barrier. The eye is highly volatile and cannot be destroyed, it must be monitored and suppressed. Risk assessment: containment breaches are predicted at 3 o'clock hours. If a breach occurs, the eye will seek the original broadcast point, Blackwood Lane, and attempt to re-establish the second, a physical vessel formed from the nearest memory source to complete the signal loop. Action: key to sub-precinct evidence locker is required for final suppression. The locker holds the only recording of the complete, successful silence frequency. Thorne looked at the key in his hand, then back at the shattered floor panel beneath them, where the relentless squeak 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 of the second was audible, scratching at the thin wood. "It all connects," Thorne whispered, the horror of his father's actions sinking in. "The PD wasn't just built on the wrong ground, my father built the wrong ground. He put the main police station on top of a prison for some kind of artifact. The second, the creature downstairs, it wants to re-establish the signal at Blackwood Lane," Miller said, his face pale. "But the eye is at the precinct. It's the original source. And the precinct is where we need to go," Thorne confirmed, shoving the key and the report into his pocket. "The silence frequency is in the evidence locker. It's the only way to stop the broadcast and stop the second." Suddenly, the floor panel beneath them gave way with a splintering crack. A massive, black-gloved hand, the sleeve of an old police uniform, shot through the hole, clawing blindly at the air. It wasn't just a physical threat, it was a personal terror. The creature was using his father's memory against him. "Out! Now!" Thorne kicked the hand away, grabbed Miller, and scrambled out the front window of the attic, dropping 30 feet into the cold, overgrown yard. They ran, not toward the road, but toward the thick woods, using the dense growth to cover their escape. Behind them, the steel door of 1478, Blackwood Lane was shuddering violently, and the thump of the broadcast resumed, faster and more erratic than before. As they burst out of the woods and onto the main road, the sirens of every unit in Havenwood began to wail in the distance, a collective, panicked cry. Thorne pulled out his radio, his hands slick with sweat and grime. "Sarah! Are you there? Report." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, thick with static and fear. "Detective, something is happening here. The lights, the files, the main server crashed at 4 o'clock. And, the evidence locker. It's opening itself. I hear a sound coming from the floor, a thump, and it's getting louder." Thorne and Miller managed to flag down a beat-up pickup truck heading toward the town center, flashing their badges and barking orders. The terrified driver didn't argue. They tore back toward Havenwood, the wailing sirens growing closer, a cacophony of fear echoing across the dawn landscape. "We need to get to that evidence locker now," Thorne said, checking his pistol. "If the eye is exposed, and the second is on its way, we're out of time." As they neared the Havenwood PD, the flashing blue and red lights stopped abruptly. The sirens died, replaced by an unnerving, collective silence. "They've evacuated," Miller stated, staring out the window. The precinct headquarters, usually a fortress of light and activity, was utterly dark. The heavy, monolithic structure sat like a sleeping beast. They pulled up to the main entrance. The parking lot was empty, save for the abandoned police cruisers, their doors wide open, lights off, radios hissing static. They found Sarah in the darkened dispatch area. She was huddled beneath her desk, gripping a phone receiver, her eyes wide and glazed over, staring at a small digital clock on the wall that read, 4:15. "Sarah. Are you all right?" Thorne rushed to her side. She looked up, but her eyes didn't focus. "The clock stopped, Detective. At 4 o'clock. The power is only running the emergency lights, and the lockers. I heard it, the thumping, it came up through the floor." A single, weak fluorescent tube flickered over the dispatch desk, casting a harsh, intermittent light over the scene. The main server was a black, inert tower. Thorne pulled the brass key from his pocket. "Miller, watch the doors. Sarah, you stay here. We're going to the evidence locker." The evidence room was located in the deepest, most secure part of the precinct sublevel. Thorne used the master key. It wasn't just a key, it was a security bypass. The lock disengaged with a solid clunk, and a small digital readout flashed, Protocol 7A active. Inside, the evidence room was lined with standard lockers, but one section of the far wall was different. It was the entrance to a massive, lead-lined vault, a structure that clearly predated the precinct building itself. This was the entrance to the sub-precinct. Thorne punched the code he remembered seeing faintly etched on the brass key's circular head, 0300. The vault door hissed open, revealing a small, sterile, concrete room, the sub-precinct evidence locker. It was designed for a single, precious item. In the center of the room, encased in a thick, lead-lined housing, sat one object, an old-fashioned police audio reel, the kind used for recording interrogations in the 1960s. A small, portable reel-to-reel player sat beside it, its power light glowing green. "This is it," Thorne whispered. "The silence frequency." He carefully placed the reel on the player and pressed the worn play button. The player whirred, and the audio began. It wasn't the high-frequency tone or sonic weapon they expected. It was a recording of a woman singing. It was a slow, melodic, haunting lullaby. The woman's voice was impossibly pure, soothing, and deeply hypnotic. It was the most beautiful and profoundly terrifying sound Thorne had ever heard. As the sound filled the room, Thorne felt a strange, heavy pressure on his eyes, an almost irresistible urge to close them and fall into a peaceful, total sleep. Miller staggered back, gripping the wall. "My head. Detective, what is that? It's making me so tired." Thorne fought the sensation, his teeth grinding. He looked at the lead casing beneath the reel. A small, handwritten note was taped there, penned by his father. "Do not mistake its function. This frequency doesn't suppress the eye. It suppresses the witness. It is the sound of absolute peace, which keeps the victims silent and prevents their screaming from feeding the broadcast. It is the sound of the Blackwood family's final night." The ritual was not containment. It was sacrifice. Thorne stared at the note, his father's true horror coming into sharp, sickening focus. His father hadn't tried to save the family, he had secured the facility and created a tool for mass silencing. Suddenly, the soothing lullaby was pierced by a thin, reedy sound, like a piece of tin foil vibrating, a sound that was inside Thorne's head, cutting through the frequency. It was Sarah's voice, distorted and terrified, crackling over his ear-mounted PD comm. Detective. The main floor. I can hear it now. The thumping is coming from the dispatch desk. And I see the eyes. They're forming in the monitors. Get out. Get out. The lullaby was failing. The silence frequency was being overcome by the proximity of the source. As Thorne reached for the volume control to shut off the hypnotic sound, the lead casing holding the reel began to shake violently. The audio reel itself started to distort, the woman's singing voice stretching and deepening into the sound of the hollow, resonant voice from the 911 tape. The lullaby is broken. The second is home. And the eye is awake. From beneath the floor of the sub-precinct evidence locker, the heavy, rhythmic thump. Thump. Thump, began again, but this time, it was louder, faster, and directly beneath their feet. The concrete floor cracked, and a deep, pulsing, red light began to bleed through the fissure. They hadn't found the key to suppression, they had found the ignition switch. The red, pulsing light beneath the evidence room floor intensified, and the floorboards buckled violently. The sound of the thump was deafening, amplified by the confined subterranean space. Get out. Now. Thorne roared, grabbing the portable reel-to-reel player. They scrambled out of the lead-lined vault. As they did, the massive vault door slammed shut on its own, locking them out of the sub-precinct evidence locker. The lights in the main evidence room sputtered and died, leaving them in absolute darkness, illuminated only by the faint green light of the portable reel player in Thorne's hands. The lullaby. Miller shouted, pointing to the player. It's still working. The hypnotic music, though distorted by the proximity of the anomaly, was still emanating from the player, and as the sound filled the confined space, the frenetic thumping from below seemed to slow, becoming slightly duller. It's not stopping it, but it's dulling it, Thorne realized. It's suppressing the rage. Keep it playing. They hammered on the sealed evidence room door, but it was solid steel. They were trapped between the awakened eye below and the sealed door above. The vent. Thorne pointed to a large, dust-covered ventilation shaft near the ceiling, wide enough for a person. It should lead to the main floor restrooms, near dispatch. Miller gave Thorne a boost, and Thorne kicked out the rusted grate. He pulled Miller up, and they crawled through the tight, dark shaft, the hypnotic lullaby playing from the tape player dragging behind them. They emerged in the darkened, eerily silent dispatch area. Sarah was still slumped beneath the desk, catatonic. Thorne rushed to her, placing a hand on her neck. Her pulse was faint but steady. Her wide, unblinking eyes were fixed on the area directly beneath the desk. She found something, Thorne muttered, pushing aside the tangle of wires and old paperwork. Etched deeply into the wooden underside of the dispatch desk, exactly where Sarah had been staring, was the map Thorne had seen on the Blackwood basement floor. But this one was more detailed. The X was no longer on his old desk. A new, much larger circle was carved out, surrounding the entire chief of police's office. And etched inside the circle was a single word, source. The eye is there, Thorne whispered, the horror tightening his chest. Not in the basement. The chief's office is the containment vessel. My father moved the artifact into the chief's office and covered it with the sub-precinct myth to keep people away. The thumping beneath the floor of the dispatch room intensified, and the sickening squeak 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 of the seconds approach was audible just outside the main doors. We need to get to the chief's office. Now, Thorne said, grabbing the reel player and pulling Sarah onto his back. Miller, cover me. Don't let the sound stop. They made their way down the darkened central corridor, the only light coming from Miller's flashlight and the pale green glow of the tape player. They reached the large, mahogany door of Chief Howard Rexton's office. The door was locked. Thorne kicked it once, twice. On the third blow, the wood splintered, and they burst inside. The office was plush, dark, and utterly silent. Chief Rexton, a man who had led the Havenwood PD for 20 years, was sitting at his massive desk. He was not panicked, nor was he slumped. He was sitting bolt upright, facing the door. He was dead. His eyes were wide open, dilated, staring blankly at the ceiling. And in his lap, clutched in his stiff hands, was a thick, handwritten journal. As Thorne gently pried the journal away, he looked at the chief's face. Around the chief's open eyes, the skin was bruised and blackened, as if he had been staring at an impossible, unbearable light. Thorne opened the journal. It wasn't a police log, it was a confession. I failed James, Thorne's father. I was the one who authorized the transfer of the eye. I didn't know what I was doing. James told me the only way to keep the containment stable was to feed the eye unseen fear. Fear that wasn't voiced. For 20 years, the eye has been contained beneath my floor, and I have been its guardian. I have used the station's dead-end cases, the unsolved disappearances, the victims whose families never got closure, to feed the fear. Every time a case went cold, the eye grew quieter. Our silence was its sustenance. But 3 o'clock has come. The containment is breached. The second is coming back to reconnect the broadcast. It's here now. Beneath the floorboards. It wants me to look at it. It doesn't have a lid. It just is. Thorne looked down at the carpet beneath the chief's desk. The pattern seemed to swirl and warp in the low light. Suddenly, the lullaby on the reel player stopped. The tape ran out. The silence that followed was terrifying. And then, the sound of the squeak 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 of wet leather was right outside the chief's door. A thin, high-pitched SNNNFFF came from beneath the desk, like something sniffing the air. The heavy, rhythmic thump started again, directly beneath the chief's corpse. The carpet at Thorne's feet began to ripple, and a single, wet patch of black fluid, the same fluid from the basement, bled through the material, centered exactly where the chief's chair sat. Miller raised his pistol, aiming at the door. "It's here, detective." "Both of them?" "No," Thorne whispered, staring at the black patch on the carpet, which was now expanding rapidly. "The second is at the door, but we are standing right on top of the source. The eye is not an artifact. It's the floor itself." The silence was broken by the sound of the carpet dissolving. The black, viscous fluid spread out from beneath the chief's desk, burning away the fibers and revealing the pulsing, obsidian-like surface of the floor beneath. "Move!" Thorne yelled, hoisting Sarah higher onto his back and leaping backward, just as the chief's body, still slumped in his chair, began to sink into the dark, churning patch. The body vanished instantly, leaving not a splash, but a quiet, sucking sound. The rhythmic thump was coming from the obsidian field itself. It wasn't just the floor, it was a living, pulsating, dark mass, the true form of the eye. The conduit. Thorne remembered his father's report mentioned using the PD power grid as a stabilizing barrier. "Miller. Where's the chief's private washroom? We have to cut the power to this office." Miller pointed a trembling finger toward a small, paneled door behind the chief's filing cabinets. Before they could move, the large mahogany office door exploded inward. The second was standing in the doorway. It was taller, faster, and horrifyingly more defined than before. Clad in the rotting, wet leather of James Thorne's uniform, its limbs were elongated and warped, and its featureless, reflective head seemed to drink the low light. It stopped the rhythmic thumping, replacing it with a low, wet hiss of pure malice, fixing its terrifying void of a face on Thorne. "The memory is here," the second rasped, its voice a sickening echo of his father's, distorted by the wet, choking sound of the Blackwood tape. The lullaby is finished. You cannot stop the broadcast. Miller opened fire. 3 rounds hit the creature's center mass. The bullets tore through the decaying leather, but instead of blood, a shower of fine, white powder, like dried bone or chalk dust, erupted from the wounds. The second didn't flinch. Thorne dropped Sarah carefully behind a heavy leather sofa and sprinted toward the washroom door, weaving around the massive desk. The second moved with impossible speed, covering the distance in a single, lurching, silent surge. Its long, clawed hand shot out, grabbing Miller's ankle. Miller screamed, his flashlight flying across the room. "Go, detective. Go." Miller wrestled, kicking at the creature as it dragged him toward the obsidian field. Thorne didn't hesitate. He burst through the washroom door, slamming it shut behind him. The small room was mostly tile and porcelain. He ripped the heavy mirror off the wall, revealing a dust-covered, metal breaker box, the old-style, industrial one. "This is it," Thorne muttered, pulling out his service knife. He had to cut the main line, the source that fed the sub-precinct containment area. He sliced through the thick, rubber coating of the wiring, desperately looking for the specific conduit. From the other side of the door, he heard a sickening snap followed by Miller's choked cry. The second was done with the pleasantries. Thorne found the marked wire, a thick, braided copper cable labeled in fading black marker, JTSUB Core. His father's handiwork. He plunged the knife, intending to sever the cable and kill the power to the eye. But just as the steel touched the copper, a voice, clear, strong, and terrifyingly close, spoke from the wall. It wasn't synthesized, it was the actual voice of Chief Rexton. "Don't. If you cut the power, you release the source. The eye needs the shield." Thorne froze, his knife poised. The chief's voice was coming from the wall conduit itself, a faint echo from the network. "What shield?" Thorne yelled back at the wall, adrenaline masking his terror. "The thump. It's not a broadcast, it's a frequency dampener. My heartbeat, wired into the floor. James wired the chief's office to my rhythm. As long as I was alive, the thumping kept the eye dormant. When I died, the broadcast stopped, and the containment failed." The chief's chilling confession hung in the air. The thumping was not the monster's call, it was the sacrifice, the chief's life literally powering the suppression. Thorne pulled the knife away. He looked at the sub-core wire. He couldn't cut it. The washroom door suddenly ripped off its hinges. The second was standing there, covered in white chalk dust, dragging Miller's unconscious body by the collar. It dropped Miller like a sack of bricks. "The eye is hungry," the second hissed, its voice layered with the chief's final agony. "The memory is ready." The creature lunged. Thorne fired his last few rounds directly into the lidless void of its face. The bullets vanished, absorbed by the darkness, but the force of the impact momentarily stunned the creature. Thorne didn't run. He grabbed the reel-to-reel player, still humming faintly from the lullaby, and hurled it at the second. It hit the creature square in the chest. The impact reactivated the player, and the soothing, hypnotic lullaby flooded the room. The second instantly recoiled, emitting a sound that was a mix of a squeal and a whimper. The creature was momentarily paralyzed, its head tilted, listening to the silence frequency. "Miller. Get Sarah. We're going to the only place it can't follow us." Thorne yelled, grabbing the chief's journal. He pointed to the ceiling of the washroom, where a small, barely visible access panel was set into the plaster, a maintenance route that his father, the builder of this horrible prison, must have installed. Thorne, dragging Sarah and pulling the semi-conscious Miller, scrambled through the maintenance hatch and into the dark, echoing network of the precinct's ventilation system. The air was thick with dust and the metallic scent of burning copper. Below them, the lullaby from the broken tape player continued to loop, holding the second in a state of confused paralysis. They could hear its frustrated, guttural sounds echoing from the washroom. Where are we going?" Miller rasped, gripping his broken ankle. "Up," Thorne replied, shining his flashlight on the chief's journal. "My father left us a way out of his prison. He called it Protocol 7C, Termination Broadcast." He flipped through the final, frantic pages of the journal. Chief Rexton's final entries detailed the existence of a high-power antenna installed in the precinct's oldest structure, the decommissioned rooftop water tower. Protocol 7C is the final failsafe. If the dampener, my heartbeat, fails, the eye must be frozen. The tower contains the original PD antenna, built by James. It is shielded from the eye below. The goal is to broadcast the silence frequency, the lullaby, at a volume that will overload the eye's signal receptors and permanently lock the second in place. The broadcast must be powered directly by the main city grid power line, bypassing the subcore. The power, Thorne pointed the flashlight at the nearest large duct. "We need to find the main rooftop access panel and re-engage the city power line. It's the only way to power the tower antenna." They crawled through the suffocating darkness, the rhythmic metallic scritch of their progress echoing loudly in the deserted building. The chief's journal served as their map, detailing the route up through the buildings and used service ducts. As they reached the vertical shaft leading to the roof access door, the lullaby from below abruptly stopped. The silence was instant, absolute, and worse than any noise. It meant the second had recovered and destroyed the real player. A second later, a sound, a high-pitched, vibrating hum, began to emanate from the floor below them, shaking the metal ductwork violently. It was the eye, fully awake, no longer suppressed. "It's searching for the broadcast," Thorne shouted over the noise. "It knows we're here." Then, the terrifying squeak 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 of the second was heard in the main ventilation shaft, immediately below the vertical crawlspace they were in. The creature was following them, using the building's own structure as a sensory network. They reached the roof access door. It was a heavy steel hatch, bolted shut. Thorne, adrenaline surging, managed to kick the rusted bolts free. They spilled out onto the freezing, wide-open roof. The rising sun was just beginning to cast a weak orange light over the desolate town. The Havenwood PD roof was vast and flat, dominated by a massive, rusty, cylindrical water tower standing near the center. Wires, thick and frayed, snaked from the tower down toward the edge of the roof. Thorne carried Sarah to the base of the tower and turned to Miller. "The access panel. Find the main breaker panel near the roof edge. Re-engage the city power line. It's marked city feed." Miller, ignoring his throbbing ankle, limped toward the edge. Thorne turned to the tower. The outside was covered in old, peeling paint, and a narrow, rusted ladder led up the side. The antenna was visible at the top, a crude, skeletal array. As Thorne began his climb, the metal hatch leading from the vertical shaft burst open. The second climbed out, its form silhouetted against the morning sky, the white chalk dust from the gunshots creating grotesque plumes in the rising light. It saw Thorne on the ladder and let out a soundless shriek, a vibration that went straight into Thorne's bones, momentarily paralyzing his grip. "Detective!" Miller screamed from the edge of the roof. "I found the panel. But the city feed wire is severed. I can't bridge it. I need to use the emergency generator connection." Thorne looked up at the skeletal antenna on the tower, the only hope left. He looked down at the second, now scrambling across the roof toward the generator panel, aiming to stop Miller. "Activate the generator, Miller. I'll buy you time," Thorne yelled, continuing his climb. He reached the top platform of the water tower, pulled open the small, control panel, and found the wiring for the antenna. It was a single input jack, designed for the reel-to-reel player. Thorne ripped the chief's journal open to the last page. A small, sealed plastic pouch was taped inside. He tore it open. Inside was a tiny, custom-made audio adapter, the final piece of the terrifying puzzle. But he had no real player. The lullaby tape was gone. He looked over the side of the tower. Miller was fighting the second, holding it back from the emergency feed breaker, using only a heavy wrench and his own fading strength. The second was trying to tear the wires out of the panel. Thorne made a desperate realization: the silence frequency wasn't just on the tape. The thump was also the frequency. And he had heard the thumping sound every time the entity approached. He pulled his radio from his belt. It was still connected to Sarah's abandoned dispatch headset, and likely to the whole system. He plugged the audio adapter into the radio speaker port. "Sarah," Thorne whispered into the mic, his voice shaking. "You're still on the line. Listen to me. You have to repeat the frequency. You have to become the broadcast." Thorne stood atop the water tower, the cold wind whipping around him, the small audio adapter plugged into his radio, his gaze fixed on the antenna wiring. Below, the second was closing on the power panel, its leather-clad figure moving with unnatural, jerking speed toward Miller. "Miller! Get ready! Emergency feed! Now!" Thorne yelled into the wind. He pressed the transmit button on his radio. "Sarah! Can you hear me? You're the witness. You have to become the broadcast." Downstairs, back in the silent dispatch office, Sarah Chen, catatonic and still, heard Thorne's voice not in her ears, but inside her head, amplified by the terrifying connection to the building's network. Her unblinking eyes were fixed on the obsidian patch where the chief had vanished. The time signature. Thorne urged, his voice frantic. "The thump. Repeat it. Become the frequency." Sarah's face, pale and slack, slowly began to contort. Her lips parted, and a low, guttural sound escaped her throat. It wasn't human. It was the same hollow, perfectly timed thump. Thump. Thump, that had emanated from the tape recorder, the floor, and the chief's heart. The sound, amplified by the radio and channeled through the high-gain antenna on the water tower, became a deafening, subsonic pulse across the roof. The second, just as it reached the emergency feed panel, was struck by the amplified frequency. The creature stopped dead, its limbs freezing mid-lurch. Its entire form began to vibrate violently, emitting a cloud of the white chalk dust. The sound of its uniform, the memory of James Thorne, emitted a high-pitched, tearing scream as the frequency tore through its physical form. "It's working. It's freezing it." Miller screamed, scrambling to reconnect the emergency feed wires. But the termination broadcast was too much. The ancient, unshielded antenna couldn't handle the power necessary to broadcast the destructive frequency. Wires on the water tower began to spark and melt, sizzling violently. Thorne realized the cost. The frequency that stopped the monster was also destroying the infrastructure built to contain it. "Miller! Power the antenna. Now!" Miller connected the final wire. The emergency generator below the roof roared to life, feeding a massive surge of pure city power directly into the water tower antenna. The antenna exploded in a brilliant flash of blue light and white-hot sparks. The thump frequency became a solid, agonizing tone, a sound that shook the very foundations of the building. The second on the roof collapsed into a smoking, twitching pile of leather and chalk dust, permanently locked in place by the lethal, overwhelming sound. But below them, the main structure of the Havenwood PD began to groan and fracture. The intense frequency had severed the final, critical containment barrier. Thorne looked down, and through a large skylight near the center of the roof, he saw the main floor. The obsidian field, the pulsating mass of the eye that had covered the chief's office floor, was no longer contained. It was flowing. The black, undulating mass poured out of the chief's office, creeping across the main floor, absorbing everything it touched, desks, chairs, computer monitors, into its smooth, reflective surface. The entire precinct was becoming the sub-precinct. And in the center of the obsidian mass, standing alone at the dispatch desk, was Sarah Chen. Her head was tilted back, her eyes staring at the ceiling, still issuing the agonizing, rhythmic thump. 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 She wasn't just broadcasting the frequency, she was generating it, using the last vestige of her mind to keep the beast at bay, tethering its power to her own terrified silence. She was the final, living frequency dampener. Thorne knew what he had to do. The eye was the source. Sarah was the key. He had to sever the connection between them before the eye completely absorbed its final witness. He climbed down from the smoking water tower, grabbed a nearby length of heavy, insulated copper cable, the city feed wire Miller had tried to connect, and looked at the skylight. Miller. Stay here. Keep the roof access clear. I'm going through the skylight. I have to break her connection. Detective, no. You can't touch that thing. It absorbs the memory. Miller shouted, his face streaked with sweat and fear. Thorne ignored him. He looked at the smoking remains of the second, the memory of his father, destroyed and frozen. He pulled the chief's journal from his pocket, opened to the first page, the map of the precinct, and used the copper cable to smash the glass of the skylight. He dropped 20 feet onto the floor of the main hallway, landing just feet from the expanding, undulating edge of the black obsidian. He looked across the silent, terrible office. Sarah was standing still, her mouth a terrible, black void from which the rhythmic thump pulsed. The obsidian field had reached her feet. Thorne ran toward her, sprinting across the clean linoleum, just as the black mass surged forward to absorb its final witness. Thorne landed hard on the main floor, the metallic scent of ozone and the oppressive, rhythmic thump. Thump. Thump, of Sarah's vocal broadcast assaulting his senses. The obsidian field, the eye, was expanding rapidly, flowing across the linoleum like black, liquid glass. It had reached Sarah's boots, the smooth, dark surface beginning to creep up her ankles. Sarah! Thorne yelled, sprinting toward the dispatch desk. She didn't react. Her eyes were wide, vacant, locked onto the void, her mouth a continuous source of the terrifying, subsonic rhythm. She was the final broadcast tower. Thorne knew he had only seconds before the eye absorbed her completely, adding her silent terror to its infinite memory. He looked at the heavy, insulated copper cable he had torn from the rooftop feed, the metal end sparking faintly with residual city power. He couldn't cut the eye's power, the chief had warned that would release the source entirely. He couldn't stop the broadcast without letting the fear scream. He had to replace the broadcast. Thorne spotted the nearest emergency power conduit, a thick junction box built into the wall near the chief's office, still humming with residual energy from the emergency feed Miller had activated. He plunged one end of the raw copper cable directly into the conduit. Sparks erupted, and a massive surge of current ran through the thick cable, illuminating the black hallway with a blinding, dangerous flash. He held the sparking end of the cable in one hand, and with the other, he reached Sarah, just as the obsidian field reached her knees. The smooth, cold surface of the eye was now a churning vortex, its rhythm pulsing with Sarah's thump. "You are free, Sarah," Thorne whispered, looking into her unblinking eyes. "The memory is ready." He didn't pull her away. Instead, he forced her head gently down, breaking the vertical, upward gaze that tethered her to the broadcast. Then, with a final, desperate roar, Thorne drove the sparking, live end of the copper cable directly into the obsidian field, inches from Sarah's trembling leg. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The eye, suddenly overloaded by the raw surge of electrical power, recoiled. The rhythmic thumping from Sarah's mouth instantly cut out. The obsidian field shifted, no longer focused on Sarah, but on the new, powerful electrical pulse flowing through the copper cable. The smooth, black surface of the eye surged up the cable, flowing toward the source of the shock. Thorne pushed Sarah clear, sending her sliding across the floor to safety. Then, the eye reached Thorne's hand. The black, smooth surface surged over his skin, climbing his arm with the speed and coldness of liquid nitrogen. As it did, Thorne felt an agonizing, mental intrusion, a flood of every memory and fear absorbed by the eye since 1978. He saw the Blackwood family's final, silent night, he saw the chief's agonizing final stare, and worst of all, he saw the final, silent moments of his father, Detective James Thorne, who hadn't taken his own life, but had been absorbed, leaving only a memory vessel, the second, behind. Thorne stared at the ceiling, replicating the final, unblinking gaze of every victim. He had become the witness. As the cold blackness enveloped him, Thorne initiated the final broadcast. It wasn't a sound. It was an intention. He surrendered the one thing the eye wanted most, his identity, his fear, and his conscious will. The obsidian field absorbed him completely. In the dispatch office, where Detective Marcus Thorne had stood only moments before, there was now only the smooth, dark surface of the eye, expanding and then, suddenly, contracting. The obsidian field pulled back rapidly, retreating from the walls, from the desks, and from the terrified, unconscious figure of Sarah Chen. It pulled back to the exact center of the chief's office and solidified into a dense, non-pulsating black slab, a containment block, powered by the continuous electrical surge from the live copper cable. The silence returned, but this time, it was different. It was the silence of a prison that was finally, terribly, full. On the roof, Miller, witnessing the sudden drop in power and the final silence, scrambled to the roof edge. He looked down through the broken skylight and saw the final scene, the solidified, terrifying slab of black obsidian, the sparking copper cable plunging into its center, and Sarah Chen lying unconscious on the floor nearby. He rushed down, found Sarah, and carried her out of the precinct, leaving the sub-precinct, now fully contained by Thorne's sacrifice, to its eternal silence. Epilogue. Sarah Chen was the sole survivor. She never spoke of the night, forever trapped in the silence of the